Okay, there we go.
Okay, so on cleaning the sensor, I guess like initially, I guess that the first question you want to ask yourself is, what does the dust look like? I guess if you've had a dusty sensor before, you've had sort of unwanted spots on your photos, you probably recognize what those um, spots look like. They kind of, the best description is that they're not hard-edged little spots that are actually kind of look like dark gray dust bunnies a little bit. And and depending on the kind of camera you have, how old it is, and the kind of lenses you have, you're going to have either more or less dust. A lot of the mirrorless cameras, especially like the Sony cameras in particular, are really prone to getting pretty dusty. Um, some of the, years ago, I had a Canon, the original 5D, and then the 5D Mark II. The original 5D was awful in terms of like gathering dust. So another issue that kind of factors into whether or not you're going to have dust in your sensors, kind of well, there's several factors. One is, when you're changing lenses, how do you change lenses? Number two, what kind of lenses do you have? So if you've got kind of a typical kit lens, those lenses are not, they're not weatherproof, they're not sealed. They don't have like the gasket on the back of the lens. So when you engage it on the body of the camera, there's no tight seal there. And also any lens that has a zoom to it, every time you zoom in and out, you're actually sucking air in and out of the lens. And so that's going to kind of generate probably, a little bit of a vortex inside the lens. And if you're in a dusty environment, you're shooting on a ranch or someplace like that, or some remote landscape where maybe it's dusty, there's a chance you're going to get dust sucked in. Okay. So the lens and the camera, they're not like, they don't form like, they're not sealed one from the other typically. So dealing with dust issues is pretty normal, and it's something you're going to have to deal with, probably pretty regularly. Typically, I've had to clean my camera at least like 3 times a year, and it's just one of those things. Now, the higher end lenses, like the pro level lenses, are usually sealed. They're weatherproof, so that eliminates. They have a gasket, so it eliminates one source of dust. Also, when you're changing lenses, it's important to keep in mind that you want to make sure you're turning the camera off when you're changing lenses, because when the camera's turned on, there's an electrical charge running through the sensor. So it's a little bit like that electrical charge is like, has like a magnetic kind of a charge to it. And if there's dust in the environment, it's just gonna, stuff's gonna kind of be attracted to that surface. So turn your camera off when you're changing lenses. Try to do it, when it's not windy, whether it's not dusty. Make sure that the body of the camera when you're changing lenses is pointed down, so you don't have the chance of stuff drifting in from here. So I mean, that's just all kind of good standard practice as a way to minimize dust issues. And it's also, just generally good protection for the camera. And so that's just kind of like basic good practice in terms of, how you're handling your lens changing in the field. If you're shooting with, maybe you're shooting, I don't know, maybe you're doing a lot of portraits and you're shooting with a fast lens, maybe like a 51.8 or a 1.4, something like that. You shoot a lot of stuff wide open. Even if you have dust in your sensor, it's really, unless you have something really like a really big chunk of debris on the sensor on the back of the lens, you're not going to notice a problem. Typically, the problem is going to show up when you're shooting at smaller apertures, smaller openings. So f11, 16, 22, 32. If you're shooting at those smaller openings, those small openings are going to cause that stuff to become more focused. Okay, so that's where a lot of people have problems. If you're shooting landscapes, you're using small aperture openings, you've got like clear skies, that's where you're going to start to see the stuff. Let's see, what else do I want to say about that? So the other issue too is is like, sometimes if you're shooting at small apertures, and you're noticing like little spots in your images, it may not necessarily be on the sensor. It could be dust on the back of the lens. So there's a whole process I go through when somebody brings me a camera that they want to have clean. So the first thing I'll do is I'll shoot a reference file, and I do that by, I've got a white card here, and I'll just sort of like use this as my source. If you go on lawn, people say go outside, shoot a clear sky or something like that. It's like, I don't have time for that. It's like, I've got a good light, I've got a card, make sure the light's even across the surface, and I photograph that, and that'll give me a reference file. So when I do that, I usually set the camera into aperture priority. I do a 2-stop exposure compensation, so that I'm going to end up with a brighter picture than normal. I don't want to have a middle gray looking photo. I want to have something that's a little brighter. So it's the process: camera aperture priority, 2 stops, exposure compensation plus, on the plus side. I'm going to put the lens into manual focus. I'm going to pre-focus the lens at infinity. So I'll just aim the camera out the window and manually focus. It's something that's like way out there in the distance. And then it doesn't matter how close I am to the card. So as long as I'm not casting a shadow on the card, I can bring the camera in this close and take a picture. And I usually have a low ISO of like 100. It doesn't really matter. It may be a long, depending on how bright the light is on the card, my exposure may be several seconds long. It doesn't matter if you're moving, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to record what's on the sensor. You're not recording a scene outside. So it doesn't, so you want to have that reference file. That's really, really important. So you know what your starting point is and where the dust spots are. So then at that point, I'll inspect the camera. If it's been like out in the field and it's dusty, I'll get people to come in. They'll drop cameras off to me that, they live on ranches, and they're kind of knocking around in their truck or their ATV or whatever, and it's dusty. So I have a brush and I knock off as much of the dust as I can, and I'll clean the front of the lens just as a courtesy, and then I'll disassemble take the lens off the camera. I'll examine the back of the lens, and because I'm old and blind, I use this thing that's called a sensor loop. It's a magnifier that's got LED lights in it, and it lets me know, because I do a lot of sensor cleaning. So this is like it's a great tool. If you're just doing it occasionally, you may not want to spend the money for it, but whatever. It's these things are a little over $100, but I've had this. So I'll examine the back of the lens for dust, fingerprints, that sort of thing. I want to eliminate that as a potential source of the dust spots. And then before I actually look at the sensor, what I do is I'll actually look at the inside of the camera here. Because what I'll find sometimes is like in the mirror box area, if you've got a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, sometimes there's like little fibers, there's little debris, there's crap sitting on the inside there, that I just want to make sure that when I open the shutter, that I don't run the risk of any loose debris that's outside of the shutter. I don't want that drifting into the camera. That all makes sense? So the other thing I do is I make sure, because I always check like the back of the lens, I check for dust around the lens mount. I clean the contacts just with a microfiber cleaning cloth, just sort of general maintenance stuff. And then I'll also kind of like make sure that the contacts are on the body of the camera are clean as well. So the next step, what I'll do is I'll put the camera into the self-cleaning mode. Now, a lot of the cameras, either when you turn them off or you turn them on, they go through a cleaning mode. If your camera's not set up to do that, you might check your menu, because that's something you want, just as kind of a matter of course for that to happen. Basically, what the camera is doing is it's vibrating that sensor at a really high frequency to potentially knock off any little dust on there. So then I'll shoot another reference file to see if that has cleared up any issues. Should I stop? Does anybody have any questions that they want to jump in and ask before I go on? Or no? Okay.
Harvey, it's Tiffany here.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. So I just got a new camera, and it's a 5D Mark IV.
Uh-huh.
And so the self-cleaning mode, every time I turn it on, it says that the sensor is cleaning. Is that what you mean by self-cleaning mode?
Right, exactly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, so I'm doing these reference files several times. Oh, so this is really important. Before you begin this, before you open the shutter to actually inspect or actually clean the sensor itself, you want to make sure you've got a 100% fully charged battery. Because if you go in there and you start to clean the sensor with a sensor swab or with one of these like rocket blower things to blow in there, and the camera runs out of power and the shutter closes on you, it's about $300 to replace a shutter mechanism. So fully charged battery, really, really important. Okay. And also if for some reason you want to have me clean your camera, I would need a fully charged battery and a memory card. So that, because what I do is I record all my reference files on the card, so that whoever's camera I'm cleaning, they can actually see what I've done and see what the progress of the cleaning was. Okay, so now in terms of tools, so again, I've got this this thing's made by a company called Visible Dust. It's called a sensor loop. So this is like, for me, it's an important piece of equipment. This is like really important. The Giottos, I use the Giottos rocket blower. There's other blowers out there. What's nice about this is like, it'll just stand up, and so it's not rolling around the table. I really like it. There are some companies that make these things that have little HEPA filters attached to the bottom, which is probably not a bad idea. I can't remember who makes it, but if you hunt around B&H or something, you could probably find a company that makes a blower with a HEPA filter, and that would be eliminate another source of problems instead of blowing around dust. Make sure you're in a sort of a clean, dust-free environment. And then sometimes what I'll find is when I'm looking inside the mirror box, is I'll find occasionally like little hairs or little fibers, things like that, that are really, really difficult to like remove. I've got a pair of tweezers that it'd be very, it really requires that I go in and like extract these little things, and these are pretty cheap. You can get these at a drugstore. There are other brands on the market that I'm not familiar with. I've always used sensor swabs. These are made by what's the company's called? I don't know. Maybe the company's called Photosol, Photosol. So the number 2 sensor swabs are the width of an APS-C size sensor. So you want to get the swabs that are the right size for the size sensor you have. And if you don't know what size camera or size sensor your camera has, tell me what camera you have and I can tell you. So I'll show you what the difference in size is here. Okay. So the smaller one that's in my right hand is for the APS-C sensor. And then this wider one is for a full frame sensor. So these actually like go across the whole width of the sensor. So when you're going to like clean, it covers the whole surface. Now, so after I've done all this initial sort of prep work, if you will, where I'm, doing the reference files and I'm cleaning the lenses and the body, and I'm looking for little bits of, debris and fibers and that sort of thing. And if I'm still seeing that there's dust on the sensor, so then you have to go into your camera. You've got to go into the menu, and let me see where it is on this camera. Actually, I haven't cleaned this camera yet. I haven't noticed a problem with it, but nice thing about the Canon mirrorless cameras, the better ones is is when the camera is turned off, the shutter is covering the sensor. So like in the Nikon Z cameras and the Sony cameras and all the other, and even the model, like the lower models, the Canon RP doesn't do this either. But like this is the R, and then the new R6 and R5, they all have the same kind of shutter mechanism, close when the camera's turned off. Now, so with this camera, I don't need to go into the menu to open the shutter. All I have to do is turn the camera on and it opens the shutter. So that is my sensor. Now, the thing about what you need to know, a lot of people get kind of terrified of cleaning a sensor because they think they're actually like wiping on the sensor itself. There's actually a protective shield in front of the sensor. And in a lot of cases, it's the low pass filter. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but you're not actually touching the sensor itself. It's like something else on the surface. So, and I understand sort of the trepidation of actually going in to clean your own sensor, but it's, once you've done it once or twice and you realize that it'll actually take the cleaning, and it's like, you kind of get over the fear. It's not that big of a deal. One thing I've noticed over the years that I've done this is that it's very, very rare to get a sensor 100% clean. Sometimes you might find yourself, depending on the camera, and it varies from camera to camera, and I don't know the reason why this is, from manufacturer to manufacturer even. Sometimes there'll be like a little piece of dust that every time you go in to like try to blow it away or wipe it off, it just moves to another place. It doesn't want to leave. And you could keep, do it. You could be chasing that little, if you're down to like one little piece of debris that you're chasing around for a long period of time. I mean, I've like spent like an hour sometimes trying to clean a sensor. And at a certain point you go, this is as good as it's going to get, and live with it. As long as you've gotten like 98% of the stuff gone, you're good. If you have to retouch one or two spots, it's just the cost of doing photography. Back in the film days, if you had dust inside the back of the camera, it would show up on your film, and you would have that as a permanent fixture, and you didn't have Photoshop back in the day, and you lived with little hairs and little specks and little pieces of crap that were, it's a lot better with digital than it ever was with film. And sometimes, like I say, you can occasionally you'll get 100% clean, but if you don't sweat the small stuff. If you've been in like some kind of really dusty environment and you've got like 25, 40, 50 spots on your sensor, and you can get like 97, 98% of them gone, consider yourself really fortunate and just move on. Perfection is not something you can ever expect in photography, if you haven't noticed that by now. So then if I decide that I really need to remove some like debris that I can't blow off when the sensor's open. So, and also when I'm blowing with this thing, I'm putting this up here. You want to make sure that you don't extend this so far into the camera that you're going to like bang into the sensor itself, because you don't want to like hit it with something hard. The same company, Visible Dust, they they have an interesting website. You might go investigate their website because they actually have some very unusual tools I never found necessary to buy, but they have like a little cage you can put there so that when you use the blower, it just doesn't go, it won't let you go too far. So that'd be one thing to consider if you're worried about it. Like I said, if you're reasonably cautious, it won't be an issue. So again, so first blow it, and then if I need to use it, so typically what I'll do, and this is not normally recommended, but it's just something I found over the years works for me. And again, this will vary depending on the manufacturer of the camera and the sensor. Sometimes you'll go in, you have to use a little bit of a solution, okay? It's a couple of drops. It depends on the sensor, like on an APS-C swab, I'll use 2 drops of the solution. This stuff lasts a long time. Like this bottle would probably last me like 5 years or something. And this is like, I don't know, cost of like $11 or something. That's what we sold it for at Crown Camera. You can buy it cheaper, probably at B&H. These swabs, if you buy them online, if you buy the Photosol ones, you're probably going to spend like 35 to 40 bucks for a pack of 10. I understand there are less expensive ones on the market. I've never tried them, but if you're going to be searching for them, I was like looking online. There's one company that makes something that are like 10, 15 bucks for a pack of these. So if I go in there, and
excuse me, what was the brand again that you suggested?
So these are just called sensor swabs, and the manufacturer is Photosol, PHOTOSOL. So if I go into clean, and if it doesn't look like there's too much dust on there, I'll do a very light swipe on the surface with a dry swab. Because sometimes that's all it takes. It's just like, rather than going with something wet. Now, if that doesn't remove whatever debris is there, then what I do is I'll have 2 swabs. I'll have one that I'm going to put the 2 drops of solution on. Then I'll have a second one that's dry. So what I have found, depending on the camera, is if I go in with a wet swab, sometimes it'll leave streaks. Not always. And this stuff is supposed to be streak free, and under, I don't say 90% of the time, it evaporates very quickly, doesn't leave any streaks, but I've had occasion where it's happened. So if I have to, first I'll try dry one, and then I have to go in with a wet one. What I'll do is I'll swipe the sensor, back and forth a couple of times, very lightly. You can actually, these things are very flexible. So I've actually, like let them flex a little bit in there. I found that I've never damaged a sensor. It's who knows, maybe at some point that'll happen, but in the years I've never actually had any unfortunate situations. So I'll go in with the wet one, and then I'll immediately go in with the dry one and make sure that I'm picking up whatever, if there's any residual moisture, just to make sure that it dries clean. And then I'll go back in. I'm constantly go back in with this thing to go back and examine the sensor, because this you can actually see the spots really, really well. Point where it looks like it's like clean, then I'll take the card out of the camera and I'll download the file, my reference, my latest reference file. I'll download it into Photoshop, open it in Photoshop, I should say, and I'll do a levels adjustment layer. Does everybody use Photoshop? I assume you all do. If you don't, speak up.
Some people don't.
I don't.
You don't. What do you use for processing?
Lightroom.
Okay, but do you have the subscription?
You mean?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the Creative Cloud thing. What
I
the
have
hell?
Photoshop and that, but I never use Photoshop. I haven't figured it out yet.
Oh, okay. Well, So you don't know about adjustment layers. So what you can do it in Lightroom. I just find Lightroom a little clunky to do this in, but you can do it. So what you would do, because Lightroom does not have levels adjustment, they have curves. So what you would do on the curve is you would take your black point and slide it over to the right, and take your white point and slide it over to the left. So normally the curve is like this, you're going to bend it this way, more vertical. Does that make sense? You're not going to do anything to the middle of the curve, but just the end points you're going to like move over. So effectively what you're doing is you're increasing the contrast. And the reason you're doing that is because you're trying to exaggerate any kind of spots that are on the sensor. Sometimes you'll open the file and you go, oh, it looks super clean. But then you do an exaggerated curve or a levels adjustment. And like if you're doing levels, you would just take your black point and move it in towards the center, and your white point, move it into towards the center as well. You're just jacking up the contrast. That is not an adjustment you would ever conceivably do it to an actual photograph. What you're doing is you're just exaggerating what's on the file so that you can kind of more clearly identify if there's any spots left. And then they'll show up pretty clearly as dark, or if there's any streaks, those will show up, all that kind of stuff will show up. So that's kind of like towards the end of the cleaning stage. And if all that looks good, I'm done. If there's more stuff there, then I go back in and I look at it a little more carefully with this, try to identify where the spots are, go back in with the swabs, and then start basically chasing my tail until I can kind of, get it clean. And so that's kind of it. It's like, if I'm lucky, I can identify the spots in like 1 or 2 swipes and, and chase it with a dry one.
Harvey,
Yeah.
just so you know, for people that just use Lightroom, there's actually in the spot healing tool, they have a visualize spots. Is that?
Yeah, there is. That's also an ACR, Adobe Camera Raw. It's also there too.
Okay.
I don't use that. I just never found it that useful, but yeah. So what Ron's talking about is it's called the healing tool.
spot healing tool. Then there's you can switch on visualize spots.
Right, and you can crank it up. So you want to crank it from the left, from the left hand side over towards the middle. It'll kind of exaggerate where the spots are. So that's another way to kind of identify where the spots are.
Is the do you clean the mirrorless ones just as like you do the other ones?
Yeah.
You do it the same way?
Mm-hmm.
Does it have a coating on it as well?
Oh yeah. Like I say, the problem is like when this camera is turned off, you got a shutter in front of the sensor. With like all the other ones, it's like your sensor's out in the wind. So if you're still shooting with the DSLR and you take your lens off, you've got the shutter there protecting the sensor. Good thing. So it's a bit less of an issue, but like I say, and if you're shooting mirrorless and you're changing lenses out there in the field and you're not careful about having the camera up or down, or and you're letting too much time elapse between like taking one lens off, putting another one on, you're asking for trouble. That's just the bottom line with it. So basically that's my process. Anybody have any questions? Or
Harvey, how much do you charge to clean a camera? Because it all sounds great, but I'm not touching it.
So an APS-C sensor, which is the smaller sensors, I charge $50, and for the full frame it's $75.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Better than me messing it up.
And I'm changing my phone number in a couple minutes. So anybody else have questions, or is there anything? Let me see if there's anything I didn't cover. Oh, also, it's like the other thing I do when I'm doing this, just as a convenience for myself, is I don't do this in RAW. I don't shoot RAW when I'm doing this. I set the camera to JPEG. You don't need to shoot a RAW file. It makes no difference whatsoever. I also make sure that I set the white balance to auto. So I'm not dealing with like, I know a lot of you shoot like maybe with like a kind of like a kind of a warmer white balance to kind of warm up your photos and that sort of thing. It just it gives you a reference frame, but makes it look really like orangey and yellow, and it's just hard for me to look at. So I set it to auto, so it's at least it's clean looking. Let me see what else, if there's anything else I missed here.
Harvey, my other question was, you said it should be turned, I just looked at my menu. You said it should be set to clean every time you turn it off and on. That doesn't just wear that function out after a while, or, I mean, it's really better to just leave it on.
If that's gonna wear your camera out, get another camera. No, it's not gonna hurt your camera.
Okay.
And if your camera's worn out, get another camera. That's
No, I can't afford another one. It's the D500 you sold me, so I'm gonna count on that.
no, that camera is a brick. That camera is rated for very high shutter actuations. I mean, it shoots at like 10 or 12 frames a second. It's a really solid machine. And as far as I know, it's like the body's pretty weather sealed, and if you've got like the upper end lenses, they're going to have gaskets on them. So that's going to eliminate a lot of problems right off the bat. Yeah, but honestly, I can't begin to tell you how often I find that there's like a lot of fingerprints and dust on the back of people's lenses that really contribute a lot to what appears as dust on the sensor. If you're shooting at like apertures in the 16, 22, 32 range, any crap on the back of the lens is going to be problematic. So good maintenance on your gear is important.
So what's the best method for cleaning that back lens, the back of the lens?
I use, kind of a lens cleaning solution and a microfiber cleaning cloth. And then I'll blow it off with this just to make sure there's no extra dust. And again, I have the advantage of one of these little magnifiers with the light in it, which lets me get really close and like examine the lens really carefully. Now you will notice that even the high-end pro lenses will get dust on the interior of the lens. Okay, that's not a problem in terms of showing up as spots on your lens. It's on the rear surface of the lens that's where the problem is going to start to show up. But it's not, and I know some people freak out and they think they got to send their lenses back to the manufacturer to have the interior of the lens like cleaned out. It is like, it's a non-issue, honestly. It really is nothing to be concerned about unless there's just like, it's all fogged over. If you've been in some kind of a really weird environment where like what's not unusual is that people that live in more tropical climates for any length of time, mold can grow on the inside of a lens. That's problematic. Okay. And there's no cleaning that, especially modern lenses. If you've ever had I don't know if anybody's ever had a lens that's gotten broken for some reason, they've had to replace. It's very instructive to try to disassemble a lens. Take the screws out and try to take it apart. It is like a hornet's nest in there. It is just, it's full of like all kinds of cables and like little gears. And it's this layered mess that there's no effective way to disassemble one and put it back together and have it be functional. And to have unless you have, I don't know, if you had like a high end, like a $7,000-8,000 lens, $10,000-12,000 lens or something that you maybe had an accident and it was on a gimbal or something and it fell off the tripod and ended up in the lake or something happened, it would be worth sending it into the manufacturer to have it like cleaned and, refurb. But other than that, if you've got just, any lens that retails for under probably $1,500 to $2,000, I wouldn't spend the money on it. I'd write it off.
So when
And
you,
if you're dealing with kit lenses that are like in the, $300 to like $800 or $900 price range, it is definitely not cost effective to have it sent in to have repaired.
so if your lens has the mold or dust in there, can you see it when you look through the eyepiece or?
No. I mean, if you're shooting with a DSLR, you're not looking, I mean, you're looking through a whole mirror mechanism, right? So that's the other thing too, is like some people will bring me their cameras and they go, I'm looking in the camera and I see all this like stuff. I said, well, yeah, but does that stuff show up on your photos? And no, it doesn't, but it's like, it's in the camera. It's like, no, so that's on a DSLR, there's like, you have the mirror box, so you've got a mirror that's at a 45-degree angle, light comes in through the lens, bounces off that, goes up into a pentaprism, and then goes through the eyepiece. So if you have dust on the mirror, or if you have dust and stuff, which tends to accumulate on, it's a thing called a Fresnel that like disperses the light when it hits the mirror and goes up into the pentaprism. So if there's dust on that, because that's like a piece of plastic that's got very finely etched grooves in it that helps to disperse the light. And so dust is easily trapped inside that. So that's problematic. I mean, it doesn't affect your photos. It's just it's a nuisance because it looks like there's dust on your inside the camera, but if it's not showing up on your photos, it's just an annoyance.
So if you're gonna like buy a used lens or something, how do you know if it has mold in it?
You would hold it up, open the aperture all the way and look through a bright light, and you can, if there's mold is pretty unusual. Like I say, if somebody has lived in the tropics or something like that where there's a lot of humidity, a lot of heat, that's where it's going to be, that's going to show up, and it'll look moldy. It's not gonna, it won't look dusty, it'll look like mold. And so that's how you'd identify that. If there's just like a few little like specks of dust on the inside of the lens and it's not on the front surface, it's not on the back surface, live with it. It's not going to affect your photos. The reason it's not going to affect your photos is because the way lenses work, there's a lot of like glass elements inside of a lens. And when the lens focuses, it's not focusing on those little particles of dust that are inside the lens. The lens is designed to focus the image on the sensor plane or on the film plane. So the focus point is way back inside the camera. It's not on those little flecks of dust. The problem is when you're shooting, when you have dust on the back of the lens, because it's so close to the sensor, and if you're using a small aperture, it starts to come into focus. That's why it's problematic on the back of the lens. And so if there's fingerprints and dust on the back, it'll degrade the image and make it look kind of soft and smudgy a little bit. Just depends on how bad it is. But any other questions? I hear silence, crickets. Okay, Ron. Power up. Okay, so so should I go into the critique now, or?
If no one
Okay.
else has any other questions, go ahead.
Okay, if everybody's okay with me proceeding, I'll just go to the critique. And also, I guess the question is like, do I need to know who shot the photos or just go for it?
I think just go for it.
Okay. You're right. Oh, one second. Okay. Here. Why is my okay? Okay, I'm going to just kind of go through the photos that were submitted to me, and then I'll, just so everybody sees what was submitted, and then I'll go Okay. So those are the photos. So now I'm going to go back through and kind of talk about them individually. So with this one, when I looked at it, there's a number of things that kind of like, kind of stuck out to me as like problematic. So one of the issues is like this big, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So it's this like, this structure on the left-hand side of the frame. It draws so much attention. It's really annoying. So it's like, I understand the desire to photograph the glory hole, but it's like this thing becomes like the dominant feature. It's competing with what the main subject is. And on top of that, I find the photo a little bright. The sky's a little blown out. Overall, it feels a little flat and needing a little TLC. So initially I did this. I just add, I'll go back. So I cropped in a little on the left to get rid of that, the bright part of that. I thought maybe that would help. And then I sort of darkened it and try to drop the highlights a little bit. So if you'll notice the difference between like over here, like the contrast and stuff back up in here, and sort of the overall color kind of has a slightly cyan color, which means it's kind of a combination of blue and green, which is a little problematic in terms of like color accuracy. So I cropped in a little on the left, added a little contrast to give more texture to the water, and kind of took some of that cyan color out by adding a little bit more blue and a little bit of magenta. And I lowered the highlights a little bit too. So this, you'll go back and forth, you'll see the sky. Look at the color in the sky up here is this really kind of like weird color that's not like you would never see that color in an actual sky. Of course, this will depend on your monitors too. I'm working on a calibrated monitor, so I feel like I have a pretty good handle on what the color of the file looks like, and that may vary from person to person there. So you'll notice how I kind of modified the color there a little bit, just a little color balance thing, and I darkened the sky down and the foreground a little bit to enhance this, and I also brought out a little more texture in the glory hole, right? A little more contrast overall. Then I said to myself that this thing on the left is a huge freaking problem. So all I did was get rid of it. And the way I did that was in Photoshop, is I copied this area on the left, flipped it horizontally and moved it over to the right and blended it in. Then I had to retouch out this little piece of a branch or tree stump or whatever that is there on the right. So immediately that sort of got rid of the big problem and made it all about the glory hole. And of course, I mean, I work in Photoshop quite a bit. I work in Lightroom and Photoshop. And so for me, kind of like getting rid of that thing on the left, it took me, I don't know, all of like 5 minutes. And so to me, this sort of simplifies the shot and makes it, kind of makes it, for me, anyhow, makes it work a little bit better. Does anybody have any questions about what I did or why I did it or why I bothered or anything like that?
Hey, Harvey, this is Lana. That's my photo. Thanks. That I submitted it because it was a photo that I've been very disappointed in. When I took the image, the subject was very dynamic. It's a lot better.
Oh, good. So, and I don't know if you work in Photoshop, but
I do.
so that's all I did. It's like what took me the most time was kind of making sure that I kind of like got rid of this little thing when I flipped it over on the other side, so it didn't look like it was mirrored. That's all.
I had a question about how you actually flipped it. I understand the cloning part, but how do you actually flip it?
Okay, so I didn't clone it. So what I did is I took the marquee tool and I made a selection here in Photoshop. So I made a selection. It's like, you know, the little marching ant things. I just sort of,
Right?
I sort of grabbed a section that was like from above the buoys down to the bottom and over. And so I selected an area more than I was actually going to need. And what I did is I so that was a selection. So that selection I made into its own layer. So in other words, the for anybody that uses a Mac, it's Command J. I don't know. And then on a PC, it's Control J. And what that does is it takes that selection and it replicates it. So it makes it like a little. It's like you've extracted a piece out of the original photograph and just kind of replicated it. So then you can use transform, which would either be Control or Command T, and then if you and that puts a bounding box around that new little that new layer that you've created, and then if you right click within the layer, it brings up a list of options, and one of them at the bottom of the list is either to flip horizontally or vertically. Just depends on which direction you want to go. So I flipped it horizontally, so it made it go from, you know, the right-hand side became the left-hand side.
Okay.
And then I just moved that selection over to the other side. I used the move tool, which is the V key, and lined it up so that it kind of, fortunately, you shot it pretty symmetrically. So this little piece here, this little, I don't know what to call this thing, this little vent thing or whatever, it's like, it lined up perfectly with that. So, and also it was fortunate that the texture of the water blended in like perfectly. So, so then like I say, I moved the selection over, lined it up so that it appeared to be like belonging where it did. The problem I had is the buoys on the right-hand side are bigger and going at a different angle than the buoys on the left-hand side. So this part got a little tricky. I don't know if anybody has used the transform tool, and then when you right-click in one of the, you know, in addition to having the option to flip horizontally or vertically, you also have other options, and one of them is to warp. So warping allows you to distort the shape of the selection. And with the most recent versions of Photoshop, you can actually really refine the warp so that you're only warping like a small piece of the file. So I was able to like just select this part of that new layer I'd created, and I was able to like shrink it down and adjust it and stretch it out so it more fit in with where the original buoys would have been. And that probably took as much time as anything. And then once I was done with that, I added a second layer, a blank layer, just so that I could, because again, this little stump thing was over here, was replicated. I had to retouch that out. So that no, it took a couple of minutes to do that. But basically that's what I did. I mean, now that I describe it, I guess because I do that kind of stuff a lot, and if you're not familiar with it, it can be complicated. But the whole thing about Photoshop is it's all about, you know, learning how to use layers and learning how to make selections and learning how to use masks. I mean, those three things are like essential to learning how to use Photoshop. And once you sort of like get the mental construct of how that stuff works, it's like, it opens up like endless possibilities. It's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Okay, so now, so then this one, so this one, I looked at it and the sky's really blown out. And the color has an overall kind of like bluish cast to it. And I think that's in large part due to the altitude that you're shooting at. So the higher you are up, the sort of the bluer the light is. And I don't know whoever shot this, I don't know if they originally shot in RAW format, if it shot a JPEG. But it's the kind of thing that'd be easy to correct in a RAW file. More
It was raw. It was a raw format. Yeah, that's mine too, Lana. I'm Lana.
Oh, hi, Lana. Okay, oh, that's right. So you have the 300. Yeah. So I looked at this and so that the color was one issue. How blown out the sky was a second issue. And I don't know how much detail you had in the sky. If it was possible to like pull more detail out of there. I mean, that would be an interesting exercise. But like when you're shooting, you want to be looking at your histogram. And you want to make sure that you're not clipping your highlights. So for you, the important highlights were in these bright areas here. And you just want to make sure that, you know, let me ask you, Lana, did you look at the histogram when you're shooting or?
I did not. I
Okay.
was very, very focused on the rocks. That's what, and you know, now that you point out the sky, it's something I've never really noticed, but you're right. There was a lot of detail that I could have pulled out.
Yeah, so maybe it's in the raw file, maybe it's not. It just depends on how overexposed those areas are. But so you know what the histogram looks like? It looks like a graph, right?
Yes,
So
right.
so the left-hand side of that graph represents your shadows, the middle is the midtones, and the right-hand side are your highlights. So if you have like a spike on the right-hand wall of that graph, you're clipping highlights. And
Okay.
and if you've got important highlights in a shot, like you've got bright clouds, you don't want that to be the case. Now this is shot at pretty like midday, so I would think you probably could have like lowered your exposure a little bit and still been able to pull detail out of like the darker areas without any sacrifice and had a better retention of detail in the highlights. But that being said, so the other thing that bothered me too is like, I'm looking at it compositionally, I'm looking, well, there's this bush down in the lower right. It's like, I didn't see how that was really contributing to the photograph. So I'm trying to ask myself, like, so, you know, what are the salient features of this image that I really want to emphasize? So my first go around was, as I did that, is I sort of warmed up the color. So that's where I started, warmed up the color, darkened it a little bit. And I started to, even though it's a JPEG, I started to pull some detail out here. And then I noticed as I darkened it, up in the upper right-hand corner, it looks like you did some retouching up here.
I did.
With a clone stamp tool, and it's really obvious.
Yeah.
Okay, because you were using a hard edge brush, whatever you did, rather than a soft edge. So that's why you're getting these hard edges up here. And that's like really kind of like, I felt like, oh my gosh, it's like, I don't know what was up there that you had to get rid of, but it's like, now it's a problem. Now that you bring the exposure down, that becomes like a problem. So then, so I also so I did most of the work in Lightroom. So I did a radial filter for the center here to kind of like, if you look here, to bring out the color and the contrast. Oh, come on. So let me go back to here. So you see how, so there's not a lot of separation in these trees here. So basically you've got these layers of things going. You've got these rocks in the foreground, you got the trees in the middle ground, and then you got the mountain in the back and the sky. So it's like a layer cake.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring out more detail, texture, and color in the midground, and with the tree line. And I wanted to bring out more contrast in the foreground. So I did like a radial filter kind of stretched across the middle here and changed it to darken and add contrast to everything that was outside that middle thing. So it brought more texture and all that kind of stuff into the sky in the foreground. And then I took a look at the crop and I said, okay, here we're going for it. And just to get rid of that stuff on the upper right and to get rid of that bush in the foreground. So now, to me, it's about the trees and the mountain. So it kind of simplified the whole shot. And I like, personally, I like this sort of this panoramic look a little bit better than sort of the aspect ratio of your original shot. And then,
Thank you. I like it too.
and then I thought, well, and I do this with every one of my pictures, is I say, well, what does it look like in black and white? And it's a whole different feeling. And I'm not sure if you're into black and white, but it's just another way of kind of approaching the shot. And I'm sort of like neutral as to which I like better, but you probably like the color better, and that's fine. I might like the drama of this a little bit better. Okay, next. So then this shot, so I really like the composition on this shot a lot. I think that there's so much, right that's happening with this. Let's see, that's the full image. Okay, so I love the leading line. I love the sort of like the placement of all these shapes and the fog in the background. However, and I understand it's a foggy day, low contrast and all that kind of thing, the photograph is still very muddy looking, so it needed more contrast. So I went to that, boosted the contrast. I did all this work in Lightroom. So I opened up, I added some clarity to it. I added some, what's the other thing called? Clarity and texture. And then I used what the hell is that tool called? It's the brush tool. So I used the brush tool to brush in the water, to add more contrast, to brighten up the highlights, to really have this really just be a really strong S curve going on here. And then I also did more with that same brush tool on the sand to accentuate the texture there, and I also did a gradation from the top down this direction to kind of add a little bit more brightness to the sky area, and to kind of like pick up a little bit more texture and detail in this sea stack or whatever that is out there. So I was pretty happy with this. And then I thought it might be interesting to add a touch of tonality to it, like a little bit of a warm tone. So then I went this direction just to add a little bit of like warmth. And the way I did this, you could do a split tone kind of a thing. What I did on this one though is I in the curves adjustment layer, rather the curves panel, you can adjust the overall brightness and contrast, midtones, highlights, and all that kind of stuff. But you can also go into the different color channels. So I went into the blue channel, and what I did is I anchored the center of the curve with a point, so it wouldn't move. So like if you imagine sort of the curve going like this way at an angle, right in the middle, I just I put a point there so that I could then move the right-hand side of that down a little bit towards yellow. So it affected just the highlights. I didn't want to add yellow to the shadow areas. I just wanted to have the highlights be a little bit a little warmer. And I don't know. To me, it seems to add a little bit of that. Seems it's very cool. I think would print up pretty nicely, actually. Any questions about that one, or?
Thank you, Harvey. I like the changes. I think that I used one of the presets for black and white, and I didn't really do a whole lot else to it. So
Who am I talking to?
Debbie.
Oh, hi, Debbie. Yeah, I think it's a terrific photograph. And also it's like, if I go back to the original, come on. If I go back to the original, you'll notice how these forms on the right and this rock on the right here, and then the shadow areas here, they're just so dark. You know, you're just losing all this like wonderful texture and stuff. So I just felt like, picking up, the brightness and all that kind of stuff. And it gives your eye more, it lets you travel through the image a little bit better.
Yeah, it definitely brings out the details more.
Yeah. It's a lovely photograph.
Thank you.
So then this one, I think it's a very nicely composed shot. I just love like the placement of these people. I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just kind of a grab shot. I think that works really, really nicely. For me, the yellow, for my taste, it's a matter of personal taste. I found it a little too aggressive. So what I did is I just sort of desaturated a little bit. To me, this, desaturating it just added a little bit more color variation. And I also added a little bit of sharpness. The other thing that I noticed too is like, I don't know if you can see, let me see if I can, let's see if I can enlarge this some. No, I guess not. There's actually some pretty severe color fringing going on. I don't know if you all pay that much attention to it. Come on. But it's, especially in Lightroom, it's a really powerful tool. So if you, very often it happens if you over sharpen, if you're adding too severe, if you're adding too much clarity, if you're not, it's always good to go to the lens correction panel and to enable the lens correction, and it takes care of a lot of that kind of color fringing and stuff like that. So I did that. And the other thing, you'll notice that there's a slight shape variation because when you enable, and I was a little, it's not that big of a deal on this, but you'll notice on the right-hand side over here, and when I go to my adjustment, you'll notice how it flattens out a little bit. Because there's a certain amount of distortion built into the lens. And if you engage the lens correction, it like gets rid of that distortion. So.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so then this one, I thought was a very cool shot. What I found was on the right-hand side, it's a little hard to see, but there's like something kind of like coming into the frame here that was probably just like an oversight. And it seemed to me that there's like way too much negative space around this. What I mean by that is like it can be cropped in quite a bit and make it a more dynamic photograph. And I also felt like it was a little bit flat. It needed a little bit more contrast. So, and I might add too, I think the lighting is great. I don't know if it's window light or studio type light, but looks really nice.
It was window light.
Yeah, is that Susan or?
Yeah, it's Susan.
Yeah, so what I did was basically I kind of centered the the subject left and right, top and bottom. So because I don't think you need all that extra stuff on the sides, and adding a little contrast really kind of enhanced the texture and color of the gloves and the light on the hat and all that. So and it got rid of the problematic area that was on the right, and then that little bit of you have kind of a horizon line back here, which I just found a little distracting. It just just to tighten it up, I think that really works very nicely. good job with the
That
lighting.
was an oversight. I missed those things. I was on the edge and it looks much better cropped in.
Yeah, well, let's not see that again, Susan. It's the last time I want to see any.
I will be more careful.
Okay. So then I got this. I don't know who the hell shot this. This is a really disturbing photograph. I don't know if the bear's dead too, but it's like really weird. But anyhow, a very intriguing image. It's overexposed. It's just like very flat looking. It doesn't have any, you've got this like really interesting reflections here, but whoever shot this is not really taking advantage of them. And the colors are washed out because the exposure is too bright. So I went this direction with it. I kind of like overall darkened the upper area a little bit, and then did a graduated filter in the foreground to kind of enhance the contrast and saturation of the reflections. So that becomes a little bit more integral to the image, whereas this, it's also washed out, and then this is like, feels really rich to me, and kind of works better. It's still not any less disturbing of an image, but it's really, can I ask like, what's going on here? Can somebody tell me? Or
That's Lisa's photo.
Okay, that's my bear. Can you hear me, Harvey?
yeah.
Okay, this is the one in Yellowstone where this bear here took down this elk, and everybody's been chasing him around. That's 791, and we were just all there and shot it, and that's what it is.
Wow.
Yeah, he has been eating on where he's laying is the rest of the elk. He took down all this rock and stuff here, and he's buried it. And then as he gets hungry, he gets up and he eats on it and unburies it, and then he buries it back up.
That's so wild.
That's been going on for about 2 weeks now.
Wow.
But, it looks much better when you did it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really intriguing image. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it just need a little TLC.
Yeah.
I mean, like all these adjustments, they don't take me long to do. I mean, I just sort of like quickly figured out with a lot of these things, like pretty uniformly, almost all the photographs are too bright and lacking contrast. And so it's like, yeah, I'm always thinking in terms of how would something print? How would it look on the wall?
Right.
I'm not really big about like how things look, sharing them on social media. I mean, that's not one of my personal concerns. So for me, it's like, so how would this look as a print? You know, how are the blacks? How are the highlights? And, you know, is the contrast okay? And is it like too bright on the edges? And so those are all the kinds of things that that I think about. So like, so when I darkened it overall, I actually had to brighten up the bear a little bit because he got a little too dark, but
that's what I was having the issue with. It was like he was gone, and then it was like, okay.
So I don't know how much post-processing you do, Lisa. I know that I know. I didn't want to sound too snarky, but
It's all right. I'm noted for it.
I know. Well, I mean, but when you get an image like this, that would actually be a very cool thing to print.
Right.
I mean, you should think about like, you know, how would you handle the post-processing, you know?
Right. Well, I did crop it in a little bit. I got rid of the forest in the background and stuff like that. And I did play with it, but then I started losing the bear, and then it's like, okay, what's the story here? And
Yeah, we have tools for like lightning, dodging, and burning.
yeah,
You know this, Lisa. I know you know it.
I know it.
Okay. Well, it's a cool shot.
Okay, thanks.
And this shot was like, it's a really lovely shot. I mean, it's just really, I love the simplicity of it. I love the background. Everything about it's nice. I felt like it was a little on the cool side. So I felt like it needed just a hint of warmth. And this is just like, and needed a little bit of contrast, I felt. So, all I did was like warm it up a little bit. And I think I boosted the contrast ever so slightly. I think so that seems a little, so adding the warmth kind of like really amplified the colors in the feathers in the plumage. And it also like cleaned up this branch that it's sitting on. So yeah, I think it's cool. You got a really nice little highlight in the eye. I mean, everything about this is like, seems pretty, I'm not a bird photographer. I don't know what all the intricacies are for the birders look for, but if I shot this, I'd be pretty damn happy with it.
Thank you. This is Debbie again. That's one of mine. And the bird was in really deep shade, and I should have realized it needed to be warmed up a little bit, but I like it too. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and you know, the color adjustments, like I say, I'm tuned into this because I do a lot of printing, and so I'm always concerned about how do I optimize color separation. You know, how can I, it's like there's like little blue tones from the sky that's on the beak, right? And on the back here, that's all from that blue tone is from the open sky. And so, and that's, and then you've got like the sort of the coolness of being in the shade and all that other stuff. But so it's like, I'm always like looking, how do I optimize those color changes and kind of just like, you know, elevate the shot to the next level. Okay, so the next shot, this one is Ron's. So when I looked at this one, I thought, that's pretty cool. I like that. And then the more I started to look at it, I guess because and Ron shoots a lot of architecture, and I less so these days, but I've done a lot myself. I'm not so bothered by the tilt backwards, but I'm a little, what started to bug me a little bit was how this part of the sign, this Thunderbird on the bottom, was it was kind of leaning downward to the right, and the one on top doesn't seem parallel to it, and it all seemed a little wonky to me. So so in addition to that feeling wonky, I also noticed that it's like, it's got a lot of, you'll notice here on the dome of the building back here, you notice that white fringe around there, around the dome. And I started noticing the white fringe over all those high points of contrast. So there's a couple of things that can cause that. And you'll notice here, look a lot like on the sky as well. Come on, like on the leaves around at the edge of the sky. So typically that's a problem of over sharpening, too much clarity, or doing too much of a color correction on the sky in the black and white. So if you've like really like jammed the blue slider in the black and white conversion, it's gonna really create that kind of a problem as well. So it could be a combination of things. So anyhow, there's not much I can do because I was working with a JPEG, and that artifact is cooked in, but I just modified the shape a little bit. If I go back and forth, you can kind of see, just kind of like tweaked it so that, so now the top of this Thunderbird sign and the one on the bottom, they're parallel to each other. And it's a small thing, but to me, it just seemed to kind of like give it a little bit extra. It kind of like worked a little bit better for my sensibilities. But I would just be careful about, you know, how much there's only so much you can do in terms of like the blue channel. Blue channels are really weak. There's not a lot of information in the blue channel. And when you start to like, you know, really slam it down like that, or if you're adding too much sharpness or clarity, you're going to get those kind of artifacts, which I personally find distracting. And especially if you make a print, it's really going to be pretty apparent.
Yeah, that was an old one, 7 years ago.
Oh, gotcha.
I should go redo it, you know, because I'm looking at now that the college kind of bothers me, the tilt. Now that I do architecture, I can straighten up my verticals.
Yeah, I mean, I could have
And,
tried.
and
to do-
I'm sure it's clarity that, well, I use silver effects for black and white. And I crank it too much.
Yeah, I mean, I find presets. I don't know. I just personally, I know that it makes it easy for a lot of people just to go, oh, that looks cool. Just click of a button, I'm done. You know, for me, if I try to use a preset, I just know that I'm being super lazy. Because I just means I don't really want to like spend the time to, really finesse it. So if that's
Was
the
your,
case,
was your
go ahead.
shutter speed on that kind of long?
I don't think so. I don't know offhand.
So I'm in Lightroom Mobile right now. I mean Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic. So I don't know how do you check your EXIF data? Where do you go to check EXIF data?
I think going to silver effects pulls it off.
It does?
I
Oh, that's
think.
weird.
If you're in Lightroom,
Oh wait, maybe it's this.
yeah, maybe so.
So that was shot with the 5D Mark III, 17-40, 1,000th of a second at f4.
That is not a slow shutter speed.
Nope.
It wasn't slow because it's handheld. Didn't have a tripod.
So that's that. So I could stop my screen share now, I guess.
So thank you. That was really helpful.
Good,
Harvey, those were good
good.
peaks.
Always learn when you show how you do it.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I did all the corrections on my iMac, and so I just created a collection so I could, pick it up on my laptop. And because I don't use Lightroom, I use Lightroom Classic, so I don't know how to like access all the. I'm sure I could probably illustrate what I did, but I'm not familiar enough with it. I should really spend more time with it. But
So Harvey, I have a question.
Yeah.
In Lightroom, or I mean in Photoshop, what tool would you use to add warmth to a image? Do you use a photo filter or do you use another tool?
well, so there's there's so many ways to add color. Oh
Yeah.
my God, there are a million.
No, I mean warmth, when you want to add warmth to it. Yeah.
Okay, so in Photoshop, so I'm gonna go back to screen share, and I'm gonna launch Photoshop. I'll open up a file. So I don't. Let's see what if I have anything here that I could illustrate that with. Come on. Hmm. No. Oh, let's see. Okay. Let me see if I can find anything here. No, I don't want to do that one. Okay. Let me see if I pick. No, let's see. Oh, no, I'll pick this. So this is not one of mine, but and it's not a raw file either. So so like on this photo, if I wanted, so I could, so you can all see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm gonna go over here to my adjustments panel, and I just picked color balance. So pick color balance. So the default is that it's set to midtones. So if I want to affect the highlights or the shadows, I go to the drop down and I can affect it. So let's say I want to take the midtones and I want to add more yellow to it. I'll exaggerate it, or maybe I want to add more red to it, right? So that's one way to do it. So I'm going to turn the eyeball on and off. So that's before and after. So that just added a lot of warmth. So I'll turn that off. We'll try another adjustment. So here, I love using curves. So like this photograph here, to me, like I look at the histogram up on the upper right, and you'll notice that like the right-hand side is clipping. It's really bright. So, and the shadow side is like there's a big gap in here. So and that's reflected in the curve. So I could take this lower left corner and bring it over to the right and move the black point over. You can see the histogram moving as I slide this.
Yep.
So just bringing the black point over, suddenly, whenever you add contrast, you're also at the same time, you're increasing saturation. So that's gonna modify the color. If I want to drop the highlights, I can pull the right-hand side down, and see it moves the whole curve over to the left a little bit. I don't know that I want to do that, but so when I talked earlier about anchoring the center, it's if I click in the middle, and if I'll click in between the middle point and the shadows over here. So now if I make a change in this upper area, it's just going to affect the highlight areas. It's not moving the shadow areas at all. So if I want to like increase like contrast in the highlights, so I've done that. So I'm going to like turn this on and off, and you'll see that. So that's increased saturation. Now, if I want to affect just the contrast without saturation, right now I'm in normal blend mode. If I go to the drop down here and go to luminosity, now what it's done is it's only affecting the brights and the darks. It's not affecting the color. I've separated the color from the luminosity. So now you can see I've increased contrast, but not altered the color. If I go back to normal, you can see how the color's boosted up, and here the color's not boosted up. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So let's say I want to, at the same time, I want to add, I want to add more, I don't know what kind of color. I'm going to move this over here to the other side. Oh, I can't do that. Okay. It's not what I meant to do. The hell, move that over. No, that's not right. Okay, just leave it. So I'm going to go to the drop. So what I just did affected all the color channels, the RGB channels. If I want to make an adjustment to one particular color, does everybody understand red, green, and blue, RGB? And then there are colors that are opposite red, green, and blue, okay? So if I want to, let's say, add some yellow to the highlights, I go to the blue channel because blue and yellow are complementary to each other. So if I go to the upper part of this part of the curve and I bring it down, I'm adding yellow.
Ah.
If I go to the right, I'm adding blue. Now, if I just want to affect the highlights, again, I can click in the middle and anchor the center, anchor the shadows, and then I can maybe click in the middle and I can add a little bit of like warmth to the highlights, right? I'll add a lot just so you can kind of see. And maybe I want to like affect the shadows differently. So maybe I want to add blue to the shadows. So now that is like a whole different look. So now I'm starting to move into this realm of what they call color grading, which is something that like people that do filming, it's a term they use a lot. And basically all it means is like you're playing with the color. Okay. So what's very popular in film when you're color grading movies is to do this kind of like what they call it orange teal shift, which means you make the shadows kind of, you know, blue cyan, and then the highlights kind of orangey. So I'm going to, let me see, I'm just going to drag these points off of here so I'm not affecting it. Where's this point over here? So that's that. So I'm going to, so let me go back here and I'll go to, if I want to do an orange, how I do it, I guess I would go to, I'll go to the red channel. The opposite of red is cyan. So again, I'll sort of anchor the center and anchor the highlights, and I'll pull the shadows into more of a sort of a cyan kind of like color range. See that?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
if I want to go the opposite direction, maybe I want to add warmth to the highlights. I can see I'm pushing up on, if I go up, I'm going into the color of red. If I go down, I'm going into cyan. Cyan is a combination of green and blue. So you can see that just making this kind of a strong S curve in the red channel, I've added like a whole different kind of a color shift. So that's one way to do color. That's pretty intense. So there's another kind of a cool thing that I don't have a whole lot of experience with, but it is, well, you can add this tool here down, or you go down here, you go to gradient map. That's a whole other discussion. I don't know if I should get into that with you guys at this point because it's pretty in depth, but there's a, over here, color lookup. So color lookup, so this is kind of like instant like color changes. So if you go to the drop down, you'll notice that there's like all these different things. So if I go to like moonlight, it does that. If I go to night from day, it's a little bit different. If I go to Kodak 5205 to Fuji 3510, it does this. If I turn that on and off, you can see it sort of like gives a nice boost to the color without getting nuts. These are all things you can kind of play with, and they're kind of, so this one was called the Fuji Reala 500D Kodak. I don't know what all those terms mean, but there's lots of things. Here's a foggy night one, kind of like does a whole different look that, here's a bleach bypass. Ooh, it's kind of weird. So all these things, here's a crisp warm look. So let's say I like that color change, right? And I go, well, I like it, but maybe it's too intense. So then I can take the opacity of this, and you know that you have these like scrubbing sliders. So if I put my mouse over the word opacity over here on the upper right of the layers panel, it scrubs it. So I can reduce it to like 0 and just scrub it up to, let's say I want to leave it at about, I don't know, 60% or something. So to kind of like goose up the colors a little bit. So that's another way to do it. So another way to do it would be to go to the saturation. So if I want to just overall, this is the master slider for saturation, increase the saturation, crazy, right? Overall. And then, but I could target any one particular color. So if I wanted to target, let's say the blues, and I wanted to increase the saturation on the blues or desaturate them, I could do that. I can also say, I know I've targeted blues there, but I want to shift the color of the blues. So here I'm shifting the color of the blues to kind of purple magenta, or I can have them go to green, right? So that's another way to kind of target things. I could take the blues, make them lighter or darker. So maybe I want to increase the saturation. This is goofy, and I'll change them to magenta, and then I'll make them darker or lighter or do something weird. So there's like, so that's like a fourth way to do things. So there's like, so what I did in the curves, I can also do with levels. I don't like levels as much because I can't finesse it as much. It basically does the same thing, but you still have the red, green, and blue channel. So if I go to the green channel, I can move the middle around, and I can, you know, kind of like tweak the colors. I can, you know, adjust the highlights, adjust the shadows, shift them one way or the other. So there's just a ton of different ways to kind of approach color.
Wow, thank you.
It was probably, and then there are the color filters. So here's one. Excuse me, that's channel mixer. That's not what I meant. Let's go to the color filters. Where are the filters? I never use. Oh, here's photo filter. So here you can. So right now, sort of the default one is this warm filter, which I can just move the slider over, and or I could pick another color. Maybe I want to go to sepia color, and I can want to, which is sort of a warm tone, but I can increase or decrease the saturation of that filter. I want to just kind of give an overall kind of warm look to something. I can also double click on the color. See, I don't know if you saw what I did. Just on the color patcher, just double click on it. And right now, it's set to B for brightness. So if you know, if you have HSB, so you'll notice the same thing in Lightroom. It's HSL. B is like L. It's brightness. It's sense like for luminosity. S is for saturation. H is for hue. So if I want to change the hue of something, I can change the hue of the color, you know, like this, and then I can go to the saturation, and I can increase the saturation. I can make the brightness brighter or darker. You know, I've got like, so here I've added, and I'll increase the density. So I've just added this like crazy green thing to it. And it gives me a lot of, this thing gives me a huge amount of like control. Now, if I didn't like that, I can just go back to the filter and, you know, pick one of the presets and then do that. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's like, there's a million ways to do color. And then on top of that, oh my God, it's like, I don't know if you want me to continue going on this or not, but it's like, there are, so let's go back to hue saturation. And I'm gonna make this, increase the saturation. I'm not gonna change the hue. Okay, so just increase the saturation some, and it's at normal. So here's another thing you can do. If you double click, see, so these are my adjustment layers. I'm gonna click on this like gray part of it over here. Come on. And it lets, oh, excuse me, that's not what I need to do. I want to go to over here. So it brings up this layer style. This is the coolest thing ever. This is the blend if slider. And what it allows you to do is to alter. So like I can change how much of the effect of this filter is impacting the layer below. If I slide this this sort of little caret thing over to the right, it basically, if I turn this on and off, you can see it's like basically taking the effect away from the shadows, or I can take it away from the highlights. Now, in this case, because it's a pretty complex subject in terms of color, you're not noticing any weird artifacts. But let's say I wanted to take it away from the shadows. What ends up happening is you end up getting like these weird kind of artifacts. But then what you can do is hold down the, if you hold down either the Alt or the Option key, you can split this thing. And so what it does is it transitions the effect more smoothly. So if I want to take it away from the shadows, I want to split these things so that the transition is smoother. It's not quite so dramatic. So this is something you do not just with color, but like if I'm making contrast adjustments or other kinds of weird adjustments, and I find that it's impacting like shadows more than I want it to, or highlights more than I want it to, go to the blend if option, and I can take the correction away from the areas I want to eliminate it from. So it's another really subtle way of kind of like fine tuning your photos.
Nice.
Yeah. So before your heads explode, I should stop because it's like it's an endless topic. Honestly, it's like.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So if you're interested more in these kind of things, there's a guy that's got a really good YouTube channel that is like so worthwhile. It's called Pix Imperfect, PIX Imperfect, and it's this guy who's originally from India, and he knows Photoshop so well. He's really a good teacher, and he does these like very targeted topics. He does a lot with color, a lot with curves, a lot with like retouching, a lot with all kinds of stuff, like retouching. It's like he's outstanding, and I highly recommend his channel. It's like you just subscribe to it, and you'll get notifications. I guess you could become a member, but it's essentially it's free. I find that I look at a lot of his stuff because it's like, as much as you think you know about Photoshop, it's like it's a bottomless pit in terms of like what you can do with it, honestly. So if you're interested, I mean, if you find this fascinating, he's one of the better ones out there.
Thank you. I will look into that.
Yep. So I'm going to stop my share, and well, I want to thank you for letting me bend your ear for a couple hours, and hope it was worthwhile.
Thanks, Harvey.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harvey.
Thanks a lot. That was really interesting.
It was good seeing you all, and I'll let you have the rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Bye. Have a good one.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Okay, do we want to see the abandoned stuff?
Absolutely.
All right, my screen just bonked out. Just a minute. Uh-oh. I think I need a new monitor. It's starting to do that more frequently.
It's your new haircut.
Yeah, it's CB style. It's the CB. It's the CB long cut.
I like it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if they were going to shut down the barber shops again here since we're going into a higher level. So I said better get a haircut. All right.
Heather has the right idea.
I think Heather's, it's about what, 11 or 12 o'clock back there?
It's midnight, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I'm about done. Sorry.
Well, that's right. You're somewhere else. Am I sharing the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess it's kind of late now.
So I'll post those on the website, the Facebook page for everybody to vote on, and please turn in your votes by Friday.
Anybody else have anything they want to bring up?
Just those of you that are doing scavenger hunt, you should have gotten a letter from me today with your team members named.
Yes.
So have fun, and we're looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Some
Thank
great entries. Wow.
Thank
This
you.
could be hard to choose.
Very good.
All right. Everybody have a good whatever.
Yeah.
I had a shoot yesterday and today, so I'm in pain, so I'm gonna be trying to stay off my feet for a few days.
You need to get that fixed.
Hey, I went and saw a doctor. I asked him to schedule me for surgery, and it's been almost 4 weeks, and I haven't heard from him yet.
Yeah, it's selective surgery, that's why.
Yeah.
I just had surgery for 20.
No, they're doing them. It's just they're backed up, and
Oh.
you try to find out if you're still in the loop, and they just have a recording telling you, "We'll get to everybody," but it seems like an awful long time just for scheduling right now. So, oh
You've
well.
had that for quite a while, haven't you?
Yeah, about 5 years, but it's
Yeah,
getting
I thought.
really bad now.
You get a Shasta orthopedic?
Yeah, I can't stand long enough to cook much anymore. All right,
I have something to say real quick.
sure.
So, a friend and I went up to the Wildlife Safari Park, in Winston, Oregon. Have you guys been up there?
No.
It
A long
is
time ago.
freaking awesome.
Yeah.
It was so cool. We went up there and we actually got to feed the bears. So that was kind of intimidating,
Yeah.
but it was so cool. And the giraffes were out, hanging out all over the park. It's a 400-acre park. And except for the cats, the bears, the alligator, and the snakes, which, are all kind of kept enclosed, and the elephants, everything else, the bison, the wildebeest, the deer,
You
the
drive through it?
giraffes,
You
they're
drive
all
through it?
roaming. Huh?
You drive through it?
Yeah, it was so cool. It was super cool. So it was a lot of fun. It was well worth the 4-hour drive.
4 hours.
So
What was the name again?
it's a wildlife safari park
And where?
in Winston, Oregon. It's about a 3.5, 4-hour drive.
Kind of
Okay.
near Roseburg, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really close to Roseburg. And it's cool. We went, and my girlfriend's SUV has a sunroof. So I was able to stand up with my camera and take photos standing up through the sunroof. It was so cool. It was awesome.
Nice.
And then feeding the bears, that was super kind of nerve-wracking because you're literally feeding them slices of apples and they're only 4 feet away from you.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was kind of cool.
You didn't
There's
feed
not
them?
many places they want you to feed the bears.
I know, but here they didn't. I mean, we got a whole education, on, and it's only they only have black bears there. So black and
So
Alaskan brown bear.
no feeding them an elk, right?
No feeding them an elk. No.
Was Yogi there?
Pardon me?
Was Yogi there?
Yeah. No, but there was this 600-pound black bear called Mocha. He was beautiful. He was gorgeous. And when they have the cheetah program is their biggest program. So they breed the cheetahs there. They were walking them around, taking them, a couple of them for walks. And they make the weirdest sounds. They were making chirping sounds as we drove by their enclosement. It was just really cool, and you could tell they take really good care of the animals. So that's all I wanted to say. That's a good place to go if you want to practice getting wildlife shots for when you want to go to Africa on one of those safaris.
That's a lot
Maybe.
cheaper.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks again, everyone.
Good night.
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 Good night.
Thank you.